Hey, this is Pastor Bunjee Garrett, and I want to take this opportunity to present you with another word of encouragement. Well, here we go again. The Biden administration is continuing their campaign against the First Amendment, the amendment that guarantees every American the freedom of speech. I'll remind you, it was almost 2 months ago when we first discovered that Comrade Biden's Department of Homeland Security was preparing to launch a disinformation governance board because nothing says we value free speech like a federal government board that regulates information. Well, after 3 weeks of pushback from several civil liberties groups, the Biden administration then decided to play possum by pausing the launch of their so-called Ministry of Truth. And as they continue to retool the rollout of their disinformation governance board, Kamala Harris went ahead and announced another attack against America's First Amendment rights. And that's right, the Biden administration is now creating a task force which will work to combat online harassment. Just to be clear, this task force is determined to police the speech that they deem to be gender-based violence. That's right, speech is violence, according to them. And according to the reports, the task force, which was launched by Kamala Harris, it's also co-chaired by the National Security Council and the Gender Policy Council. Did you know that we have a Gender Policy Council? Well, we do. And it's really my hope that they're working really hard to finally come up with, a working definition for gender-based words like man and woman, but probably not. According to the reports, this new task force is going to spend the next 6 months coming up with recommendations about how our government and the private sector can work together to tackle online harassment. And while every decent person will immediately agree that it's wrong to bully people in any arena, including online, well, we can be certain that this task force is probably going to be targeting those who maintain a biblical worldview regarding sexual immorality. Now, in order to prove my point, let's just consider a statement that Biden just made on Wednesday when he assured us that pride is back at the White House. That's what he said. Pride is back at the White House. And as he prepared to sign yet another of his famous executive orders, Biden announced that his plan is to, and I quote here, combat discrimination against LGBTQLI, plus Americans. Yeah, that's what he said. So Biden here, he wants to combat discrimination against those who insist that we identify them as being different from those who are cisgender. They want to be discriminated and then complain when they get discriminated. I can't even make sense of it. Now, as we consider the way that Kamala Harris is launching this task force in order to, probably silence the voices of those who take issue with the LGBTQIA plus agenda, we must not fail to recognize here that this is not only a violation of our First Amendment rights, but this is the same administration that's currently allowing pro-abortion activists to break federal laws by literally threatening the lives of those who are pro-life. For example, consider the recent threats of one activist group who goes by the name Jane's Revenge, as if they're speaking for Jane Roe. This group sent an open letter to pro-life centers across the country in which they not only confessed to committing a lot of acts of violence and vandalism at pregnancy centers throughout our country, but they also promised to escalate their tactics if pro-lifers continue to campaign against abortion. The letter also declares open season. That's what they call it. They call it open season, which is hunting terminology. It's open season, according to them, on pro-lifers as they threaten to increase their drastic measures against us. Now, as we consider the threats of these domestic terrorists who clearly love to murder unborn babies, I can't help but to wonder, when is the White House going to create a task force to deal with these literal threats of violence? They're not just picking on people. They're not just bullying or making fun of it. They're literally threatening violence. Not only that, but, when will the White House enforce the federal laws against those who are threatening our Supreme Court justices? For example, one of Justice Kavanaugh's neighbors who wanted to remain anonymous for obvious reasons, He recently described the aggressive, vile behavior of the protesters who have been outside of the justice's home for weeks now. And the protesters are not only there at all hours of the night, but they're screaming obscenities and even threatening his family. And not only that, but one protester even attempted to break into Justice Kavanaugh's house in an attempt to murder him and his family. And yet still no task force. No task force to stop this literal harassment. Oh, and where are the hearings for the October 6th insurrectionists who breached the police lines as they stormed the steps at both the Senate and the Supreme Court as they tried to stop Justice Brett Kavanaugh's nomination and confirmation to the Supreme Court? That's right. Remember, it was back in October 2018. That's when a mob of pro-abortion activists, they actually took over a part of the Hart Senate office building, which is part of the Capitol complex, and yet still no task force to combat the harassment caused by these angry pro-abortion activists. What about the literal violence caused by Antifa, whose members are constantly harassing conservatives? Where's the task force focused on combating these left-wing groups who not only call for violence, but they've actually caused millions and millions of dollars in damages as they've engaged in their mostly peaceful protests? Rather than pursuing criminal prosecution, the progressive left is quick to bail these guys out, and leftist judges are quick to dismiss their charges, and no task force to stop their harassment. What about the increasing crime rates in Democrat-run cities where, where's the task force that's focused on answering the question, is there a connection between defunding the police and the increase of violent crime that's been occurring since 2020? Where's the task force that's tackling the increasing amount of violent crimes like rape, aggravated assault, and homicide in many of these Democrat-run cities? What about the increase of gang violence and human trafficking? Is this connected with the increasing number of immigrants who illegally cross into our country? Where's the task force to tackle these literal crimes that are happening here in America? As we consider the crime wave that's happening across our country, it seems odd to me that the Biden administration just seems to be more concerned about people who simply speak out against those in the LGBTQIA plus community who have all but confessed that they're actually grooming our kids. Yeah, they've actually sung it in a song that they're coming for our kids. And rather than addressing the actual acts of violence committed by left-wing extremists, the Biden administration would rather just limit the freedom of speech of those who speak out against these things. Yeah, they just want to limit the freedom of speech of those who oppose the agenda of those who have already told us up front they're coming for our kids. Well, not only are they creating this task force to silence the speech of those who maintain a biblical worldview, but they're also gearing up for a gun grab as they attempt to pass red flag gun laws at the federal level, which will grant law enforcement the power to go and confiscate any individual's guns if they're perceived to be a threat to themselves or others. And listen, this push for federal level red flag gun laws is happening despite the fact that the research has already revealed that the states where red flag gun laws have already been implemented, well, those states saw no significant change in the number of people killed, whether in a mass public shooting or robberies or aggravated assaults or burglaries. At the same time, there is some evidence that the rape rates rise in these states wherever red flag gun laws are enforced. Now, with all this in mind, you better believe that the Biden administration is working hard to simply diminish the American dream by robbing us of our First and our Second Amendment rights. And as we consider Biden's proclamation that pride has returned to the White House, well, I can't help but to remember something that King Solomon wrote in the book of Proverbs. It's there where he declares, "Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall." Remember, God rejects the proud, but he gives grace to the humble. So if pride has returned to the White House, well then, what's coming for our nation? With all this, it's important to remember what Paul wrote in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5. There he declares, "When they say peace and safety, then sudden destruction comes upon them, as labor pains upon a pregnant woman, and they shall not escape." In light of these verses, it seems to me that America is quickly heading for sudden destruction. With that being the case, the best thing that we can do, Christian, is to pray for our nation and to pray for the spiritual strength that we need so that we can take a stand by preaching the gospel message of Jesus Christ, even if it becomes a criminal act to do so. Remember, the gospel of Christ is the power of God to salvation for everyone who believes. And so with this as the goal, let's ask Christ Jesus for the courage that we need so that we can continue to reach every unbeliever here in these last days. And as we walk by faith with Jesus, I can assure you that he will help us to fight the good fight of faith, and all for the glory of God.